Kris Kristofferson lived a life that many people would find hard to fully understand because it was filled with contrasts, struggles, and deep personal choices that shaped who he became over time. Toward the later years of his life, something changed in him. He began to look back, not just at his success, but at the decisions, regrets, and moments that defined his journey. He started writing down thoughts and memories that he had carried quietly for many years. These were not simple stories or casual reflections. They were honest and sometimes painful truths about his relationships, his career, and the paths he chose. People who were close to him noticed that these writings felt different. They were more open, more emotional, and more revealing than anything he had shared before. What made this even more powerful was not just what he said, but why he chose to say at that point in his life. As time slowed down for him, it seemed like he no longer wanted to hide anything. He wanted to face everything clearly and leave behind something real and honest. This decision showed a side of him that many people had never fully seen before. It was not about fame or success anymore. It was about truth, understanding, and perhaps finding peace. His life had been filled with achievements, but also with inner conflicts, and now he was finally ready to speak about them without fear. From the beginning, Kris Kristofferson was not like most people who enter the world of music or entertainment. He came from a background that was strict, disciplined, and very different from the creative life he would later choose. His father was a high-ranking officer in the military, and this meant that his childhood was shaped by rules, expectations, and constant movement from one place to another. Because of this lifestyle, stability was not something he experienced often while growing up. However, this environment also helped build his strong character. He learned discipline, responsibility, and the importance of hard work at a very young age. At the same time, he was also very intelligent and curious about the world. He was the kind of person who could succeed in academic settings just as easily as he could handle physical challenges. This balance between mind and body became one of the most important parts of his identity. While many people saw him as tough and confident, there was always a deeper, more thoughtful side to him. This made him stand out in every stage of his life. Even during his school and college years, he showed that he was not afraid to push himself beyond limits. He took part in sports like boxing, football, and rugby, not because it was easy, but because he believed in giving his best effort no matter what. People who knew him during those years often said that his strength was not just physical, but also mental. He did not give up easily, and this quality stayed with him throughout his life. As he grew older, Kris continued to follow the path that seemed expected of him. He joined the military, just like his father, and quickly proved that he had the skills and determination to succeed there as well. He trained hard, became a helicopter pilot, and earned respect for his abilities. From the outside, his life looked perfect. He had a strong career, a good reputation, and a clear future ahead of him. But inside, something was not fully right. There was a quiet desire growing within him, something that did not fit into the structured world of the military. He was drawn to writing, music, and creative expression. This was not something he could easily ignore. Even though he had achieved so much in his military career, he started to feel that it was not the life he truly wanted. This created a deep inner conflict. On one side, there was duty, family expectations, and stability. On the other side, there was passion, creativity, and a desire to express himself freely. This kind of struggle is not easy for anyone, especially when the stakes are so high. Choosing one path meant leaving the other behind. For a long time, he tried to balance both, but eventually, he had to make a decision. That decision would change his life completely. It was not a safe choice, and it came with many risks, but it was honest. He chose to follow his passion, even if it meant facing uncertainty and possible failure. The journey into music and writing was not easy for Kris Kristofferson. Success did not come quickly, and there were many moments when things seemed uncertain. He had responsibilities, including his family, and the pressure to provide for them made everything more difficult. There were times when his work was rejected, and his efforts did not bring immediate results. These moments tested his patience and his belief in himself. However, he did not give up. The same determination that helped him succeed in sports and the military now helped him push forward in his creative career. Slowly, things began to change. His talent started to gain recognition, and people began to see the depth and honesty in his work. His songs were not just entertaining. They told real stories and expressed real emotions. This made them powerful and relatable. Over time, he built a career that many would admire, but even then his life was not without challenges. Fame and success brought their own set of problems, including personal struggles and complicated relationships. These experiences added more layers to his personality and gave him even more to reflect on later in life. Looking back, it becomes clear that every stage of his journey, whether successful or difficult, played an important role in shaping who he became as he reached the later years of his life. Kris began to look at everything with a different perspective. The things that once seemed most important, like fame and recognition, started to matter less. What became more important was understanding his own life and the choices he had made. This is where his confessions come into focus. He was not trying to impress anyone or protect his image anymore. Instead, he wanted to be honest, even if that honesty revealed mistakes or regrets. This kind of openness requires courage, especially for someone who has spent years in the public eye. His reflections showed that he was aware of both his strengths and his weaknesses. He understood that his life was not perfect, and he did not try to pretend otherwise. This honesty made his story even more meaningful. It showed that even someone who achieved so much could still feel uncertain, make mistakes, and learn from them. His decision to share these truths was not about seeking attention. It was about leaving behind something real and valuable. It was a way of making sense of his own journey and perhaps helping others understand their own lives better. In the end, the story of Kris Kristofferson is not just about fame, talent, or success. It is about a man who lived a full and complex life, faced difficult choices, and remained true to himself even when it was not easy. His final reflections and confessions remind us that it is never too late to look back, understand our past, and speak the truth. Life is not always simple, and people are not always perfect, but there is value in honesty and self-awareness. By choosing to share his thoughts before the end of his life, he gave the world a deeper understanding of who he really was. He showed that behind the public image, there was a person who felt, struggled, and grew just like anyone else. This is what makes his story so powerful and relatable. It is not just about what he achieved, but about what he learned and what he chose to share when it mattered most. As people looked deeper into the life of Kris Kristofferson, they began to understand that his journey was not only shaped by success, but also by the weight of expectations and the quiet pressure he carried for many years. Coming from a military family, there was always a clear idea of what his life should look like. His father had built a respected career in the armed forces, and it seemed natural for Kris to follow the same path. For a long time, he did exactly that. He trained hard, followed orders, and built a future that others admired. But deep inside, there was always a part of him that felt out of place. This feeling did not appear suddenly. It grew slowly over time, becoming stronger as he experienced more of life. While he respected the discipline and structure of the military, he also felt limited by it. He wanted something more, something that allowed him to express his thoughts and emotions freely. This inner struggle was not something he openly talked about during those years. Instead, he kept it inside, trying to balance two very different parts of himself. On one side was a responsible soldier and family man, and on the other was a dreamer who wanted to write songs and tell stories. This kind of conflict can be difficult for anyone, especially when it involves choosing between stability and passion. For Kris, this decision was not just about career, but about identity. He had to ask himself who he really was and what kind of life he truly wanted to live. These questions did not have easy answers, and the process of finding them took time, courage, and sacrifice. One of the most important turning points in his life came when he decided to leave behind a path that seemed safe and certain. Walking away from a promising military career was not an easy choice, especially when it meant disappointing people who believed in him and expected him to continue. It also meant facing an uncertain future with no guarantees of success. At that time, pursuing a career in music was a risky move, especially for someone with his background. But Kris understood that if he ignored this calling, he might spend the rest of his life wondering what could have been. That thought alone was enough to push him forward. He chose to take the risk, even though it meant starting over from the beginning. In the early days, life was far from easy. He had to take on different jobs just to support himself while trying to make a name in the music world. There were moments of doubt, times when things did not go as planned, and days when giving up might have seemed like the easier option. But he held on, believing that his voice and his stories mattered. Slowly, his persistence began to pay off. His songs started to reach people, not because they were perfect, but because they were honest. He wrote about real experiences, real emotions, and real struggles. This authenticity became one of his greatest strengths. It allowed listeners to connect with his music on a deeper level, and it helped him build a place for himself in an industry that is often difficult to enter. As his career grew, so did the complexity of his life. Success brought recognition, but also brought challenges that were not always visible to the public. Relationships became more complicated, and the demands of his career sometimes created distance between him and the people he cared about. These are struggles that many people face, but in his case, they were often magnified by the pressures of fame. Looking back later in life, these were some of the moments he reflected on the most. In his writings, he did not avoid these topics. Instead, he faced them directly, acknowledging the times when he could have made different choices or handled situations better. This honesty is what made his confessions so powerful. He was not trying to present himself as perfect or without fault. He was simply sharing his truth, even if it was uncomfortable. This level of openness is rare, especially for someone who spent so much of his life in the public eye. It showed a willingness to grow and to accept responsibility for both the good and the difficult parts of his journey. Through these reflections, it becomes clear that his life was not just about external success, but also about internal understanding. He was constantly learning, changing, and trying to make sense of his experiences. Another important aspect of Kris Kristofferson's life was his ability to evolve over time. He was not someone who stayed the same or became fixed in one identity. Instead, he continued to grow, both as an artist and as a person. His early experiences in the military, his education, and his struggles in the music industry all contributed to this growth. Each stage of his life added something new to his perspective. This is one of the reasons why his later reflections carried so much depth. They were not just based on a single moment, but on a lifetime of experiences. When he looked back, he was able to see patterns, understand choices, and recognize the impact of his actions in a way that is only possible with time. This kind of reflection is not always easy. It requires honesty and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. But for Kris, it seemed like something he needed to do. It was a way of bringing clarity to his life, and perhaps finding a sense of peace. His decision to document these thoughts shows that he valued truth more than image. He was not concerned with how people might judge him. Instead, he focused on being real and leaving behind something meaningful. In the final years of his life, there was a sense that Kris Kristofferson had reached a point of acceptance. He had lived through success and failure, joy and regret, and he understood that all of these experiences were part of his journey. His confessions were not about trying to change the past, but about understanding it. They were a way of putting his thoughts into words, so that others could learn from them or simply see a more complete picture of who he was. This is what makes his story so powerful. It is not just about achievements or fame, but about the human experience. It shows that even someone who has accomplished so much can still feel uncertain, make mistakes, and seek understanding. By sharing his truth, he created something that goes beyond his career. He left behind a message about honesty, growth, and the importance of facing one's own life with courage. This is something that can inspire people from all walks of life. It reminds us that no matter where we come from or what we achieve, there's always value in being true to ourselves and in understanding the path we have taken as time went on. The deeper layers of Kris Kristofferson's life began to reveal something even more meaningful than success or struggle alone. It became clear that much of what he carried inside him was not just about career choices or public life, but about the emotional weight of the relationships he experienced along the way. Like many people who live intense and demanding lives, he often found himself torn between his personal connections and his professional ambitions. There were moments when his dedication to music and storytelling pulled him away from those closest to him, and over time, that distance created feelings he could not ignore. In his later reflections, he did not shy away from these truths. Instead, he spoke about them with honesty, recognizing that even though he had followed his passion, there were costs that came with it. These were not always easy things to admit, especially for someone who had spent years building a strong and confident public image. But by choosing to face these realities, he showed a level of self-awareness that many people never reach. His words suggested that he understood how important those relationships were, even if he had not always given the attention they deserved in the past. This realization did not come from a single moment, but from years of thinking, remembering, and trying to understand his own actions. It was part of a larger process of looking back and asking difficult questions, not to judge himself harshly, but to learn and grow from what he had experienced. Another important truth that seemed to come through in his final reflections was the idea of identity and how it can change over time. For much of his life, Kris Kristofferson was known for many different roles. He was a soldier, a student, an athlete, a songwriter, and an actor. Each of these roles came with its own expectations and responsibilities, and at times, it may have been difficult to fully understand where one ended and another began. This kind of complexity can make it hard for a person to feel completely settled or certain about who they are. In his earlier years, he may have focused more on meeting expectations or achieving goals, but as he grew older, his perspective seemed to shift. He began to look beyond titles and achievements, focusing instead on the deeper question of what truly mattered to him as a person. This shift is something that many people experience later in life, when the need for external approval becomes less important than inner peace and understanding. His writing suggested that he was no longer trying to prove anything to the world. Instead, he was trying to understand himself more clearly.